Jai Shri Radhe. So Vaishnav Unko Jai Shri Krishna. Continuing today in the Varta 164. It's day 181 of our readings. The story of the man who ate on the cremation ground. Sri Gosaiji instructed, "Please fast all day tomorrow and then the next day I will initiate you." The Vaishnava complied, and after he had fasted for one day, bathed and came to Sri Gosaiji in pure clothing. He requested him to grant him the Brahma Sambandha initiation, and Sri Gosaiji did so, also renaming him Vaishnav Das, servant of the Vaishnavas. He granted him one swarup of Sri Thakurji to serve, and also taught him all the ways of such service. The Vaishnav took that Sri Thakurji home with him. He cleaned out all the old clothes and cooking vessels and prepared a temple for his Lord. He began to serve the Lord exactly as Sri Gosaiji instructed. He then requested Sri Gosaiji to grace his home with his presence, and Sri Gosaiji went there to perform the Arati ceremony for his Sri Thakurji. He gave as much of a donation as he could to Sri Gosaiji, and thereafter called many Vaishnavas to his home and honoured them all with Mahaprasad. He proceeded to serve his Sri Thakurji exactly as Sri Gosaiji instructed, and before too long, Sri Thakurji granted him his direct experience. He would personally ask for whatever he required. That cremation ground Vaishnava thus became an accomplished Vaishnava. He served in this way for many, many days until his body became incapable. Then he gave his Sri Thakurji and everything else that he owned to Sri Gosaiji and then left his body. He entered the eternal Leela. The Vaishnava then performed his last rites. Bhav Prakash. The moral of this story is that Vaishnava should have perfect faith in the words of Sri Gosaiji. When Sri Gosaiji told Sri Gosaiji told him to, the king ate the leftovers of that Vaishnava and his leprosy disappeared. Such firm faith is a huge thing. Everything can be perfected thereby. Whilst that Vaishnava was trying to test Sri Gosaiji, he was in constant remembrance of him, and thus Sri Gosaiji was able to transform his intelligence. Thus concludes Varta 164, the story of one man from another path who ate at the cremation ground. He was the recipient of Sri Gosaiji's great grace and an accomplished Vaishnava. There is truly no end to his tale. Varta 165, the story of a king from the east who ate prasadi leftovers on the cremation ground. Bhav Prakash. He is a devotee of Rajasi disposition. In the eternal Leela, his name is Suvrata. He is one of the gopis who left their bodies when they did not manage to reach Sri Krishna for the Ras Leela dance. She manifests from Mohani and is thus the personification of her divine loving mood. Part 1. This king lived in East, and he suffered from terrible leprosy. He had taken medical treatments from many doctors whom he had summoned to him. He had called astrologers and performed sacred ceremonies on their say-so, all of which had cost him a lot of money. However, his disease was not cured. One Brahmin told him, "O king, you should go on a pilgrimage," and he did so. One day on his travels he arrived in Gokul. Up till then his pilgrimage had also failed to cure his disease. In Gokul he met and bowed down to Sri Gosaiji. He stood before him with his hands bound together. Seeing him, Sri Gosaiji, who is most kind and the knower of everyone's hearts, felt sorry for the king. He told his personal servant to ask the king why he was standing there with his hands bound together. The king replied, "O Maharaj, I come from a village in the east. I have contracted this terrible disease. I have called many doctors and taken many medicines. I have given charitable donations on the occasion of eclipses. I have spent a lot of money and tried everything I have been advised to do. Still, there has been no improvement in my condition. One Brahmin advised me to come on a pilgrimage, O Maharaj. Whilst doing so, I have come into your presence. I have also taken poison several times, thinking that if I die in a holy place, it would be better for me. However, my time to die is not yet here. Therefore, O Maharaj, I am now a fearful coward, and thus have come to you. Please do to me whatever you think fit. Now I do not wish to leave you and go elsewhere." Sri Gosaiji, his personal valet, told him what the king had said. Sri Gosaiji found the king's grief unbearable. Sri Gosaiji instructed the valet to tell the king to untie his hands and go to the cremation ground, where one of his disciples could be found. You should eat his prasadi leftovers, then your disease will be cured. However, he will not wish to give you the leftovers, so you will have to take them forcefully. Do not worry about having to do this. When the valet had told the king all of this, the king decided to do as he was told. He prostrated before Sri Gosaiji and then went to the cremation ground. The king asked the Vaishnava for his prasadi leftovers. He refused, but the king grabbed them and ate them. As soon as they entered the king's stomach, his leprosy was cured. His body was renewed. The king thought to himself, Sri Gosaiji is most certainly the Lord himself. Thinking this, he returned to Sri Gosaiji, who was sitting in his bertak. He was giving discourse on Sri Subodhaniji. All the Vaishnavas were sitting and listening. The king approached him and stood before him with folded hands and piped up, O Maharaj, I had heard in the Srimad Bhagavatam that Sri Thakurji manifests in certain forms. That I have seen with my own eyes today. I see that you are the Lord himself. So, O Lord, please bless me. Please initiate me with the Lord's name and Brahma Sambandh. Sri Gosaiji replied, Our path is very hard to follow. You are accustomed to eating prohibited foodstuffs. Therefore, how can I initiate you? The king said, O Maharaj, from now on I shall not eat any forbidden items. I shall do exactly as you tell me. I shall stay with you and not go home. Sri Gosaiji told him to go and take a bath. The king bathed and returned, supplicating, Now, please, grace me. Sri Gosaiji sat the king down and initiated him with the Lord's name. He then told him to fast for the whole of the next day. The day after tomorrow I shall grant you the Brahma Sambandh initiation. After fasting, the king bathed and dressed in pure clothing. He stood before Sri Gosaiji. He said, O Maharaj, please bless me with the Brahma Sambandh initiation. Sri Gosaiji accepted Sri Navaneet Priyaji's lunchtime offerings back as Mahaprasad, and then gave the king the Brahma Sambandh initiation close to Sri Navaneet Priyaji. The king had his holy sight. After the Rajbhog Arati, Sri Gosaiji came down and sat in his bertak. The king prostrated before him and made a donation. Sri Gosaiji told him to partake of Mahaprasad there. When Sri Gosaiji had partaken of his prasad, rinsed his hands and mouth and eaten a pan bida, he served the king his prasadi leftovers with his own hands. The king partook of Mahaprasad and then supplicated Sri Gosaiji, O Maharaj, please now, may I stay here? Sri Gosaiji replied, You are a king, therefore you should return home. Your troubles have all been dispersed. The king spoke up, But my mind's tendencies may not have been reformed. It's up to you. Please grace me. Sri Gosaiji called for a piece of cloth and printed his footprints upon it with red powder paste. He instructed the king, Every day you should offer all that you prepare to this cloth and accept these offerings back as Mahaprasad. Then your mind will be fixed upon the Lord. Always be very kind to Vaishnavas. If a Vaishnava comes to your house, you should serve them lovingly. Then Sri Gosaiji took the king with him to Sri Natadwara, where he had the holy site of Sri Nataji. He then took Sri Gosaiji's permission and proceeded to tour the whole of the Vraja land. He returned after quite a few days, having completed the tour. He prostrated to Sri Gosaiji. He stayed there for some time and had the holy site of Sri Nataji every day. He then took Sri Gosaiji's permission and returned to his own residence. It took him some time to get there. He began to perform his seva exactly as Sri Gosaiji had instructed. He served the Vaishnavas and fed them with Mahaprasad regularly. He served the Vaishnavas very lovingly and sent generous donations every year to Sri Gosaiji and Sri Navaneet Priyaji. He had a lot of attachment to Sri Nataji. He lived in this way until the end of his days and became an accomplished Vaishnava. Bhav Prakash. Associating with an accomplished Vaishnava has this effect. The king's leprosy was cured simply by his eating the prasadi leftovers of the cremation ground Vaishnava. He became a good Vaishnava. Thus always keep the company of great Vaishnavas. Thus concludes Varta 165, the story of the king who ate prasadi leftovers on the cremation ground. He was the recipient of Sri Gosaiji's great grace and an accomplished Vaishnava. There is truly no end to his tale. Concluding here for today, day 181, and tomorrow we will continue with Varta 166, the story of Rupa Porya, the god Sri Nataji's Lion Gate. Sab Vaishnavan ko Jai Shri Krishna, Aaj ke Anand ki Jai ho, Jai Jai Shri Radhe.